FIXnotes New Wealth Creation Workshop, non-performing mortgage note due diligence overview. So what does due diligence mean? It's the investigation or exercise of care that a reasonable business or person expected to take before entering into an agreement or a contract with another party. So what are we doing right now? We're about to buy some mortgage notes. We're going to do our due diligence before we actually sign a contract. I wanted to bring up secured versus unsecured mortgage notes. A secured mortgage note is collateralized against a property, whereas an unsecured mortgage note at one time was collateralized against a property, and it's no longer collateralized. So we're looking to invest in secured mortgage notes, and through due diligence, we're going to determine if it's secured or unsecured. We're going to look at both non-performing first mortgages and non-performing second mortgages. We're going to look at some different due diligence things that we do and what we're looking for, because they are different. From my experience, the majority of the first mortgage exits with non-performers are through the property. And then it's the opposite for non-performing seconds. A lot of our exits are through the borrower and not the actual property. My disclosure statement is I've managed a lot, but my true skill and expertise is as a second mortgage note investor. I'm not a property guy, and that is why I fell in love with the note business. I've definitely have bought first. I've managed a lot of first. It's just a different entity and a different breed, and you really need to know the difference. Some people do both, and sometimes you really can't control what the exit's going to be. You need to force the exit, let the homeowner or the property decide it, and then execute the exit. So I wanted to bring up a non-disclosure confidentiality agreement. This is something that a note seller is going to make you sign to look at their spreadsheets and definitely to get access to the files to actually do the real due diligence on the collateral files. A non-disclosure confidentiality agreement is a legal contract or part of a contract between at least two parties that outlines confidential material, knowledge, or information that the parties wish to share with one another. There's a lot of information, homeowners' names, property addresses, social security numbers. There's a lot of information that's being supplied to you, and you need to keep that private, and you need to use it as personal use for your due diligence. And if you don't execute the trade, you need to delete that stuff and just get rid of it. One thing to always remember, when you're doing your due diligence on a mortgage note, you don't own that. So you definitely don't want to be talking directly to the borrower. You don't want to be sending a door knock out to the property. Even if you're trying to get a value of the property, it's got to be more of a value from the street than actually walking on the property. But who's ever doing that BPO for you, once you own the asset, everything's open. You can do whatever you want. But in my opinion, it's a major no to touch base with the borrower or go near the property. Obviously, you can drive by it. You can go around it. You need to get your property values. You need to get a good idea of what's going on with the property. Just something that I wanted to point out. So non-performing mortgage note due diligence information. When it comes to mortgage note due diligence, no matter if it's a first or second, all we're doing is reviewing information to help us determine if we're going to buy that mortgage note and at what price we're going to buy that mortgage note at. So 2 points that I wanted to talk about when it comes down to exiting non-performing second mortgage note deals. That will help a lot with mindset and due diligence. So from my experience and data of working around 1,200 non-performing second mortgage loans for about 100 different investors over the last 15 years, the majority of the exits are through the borrower. It's like 75% the exits are through the borrower, where the remaining 20 to 25% of the exits are actually through the property when it comes to non-performing seconds. From what I hear, from the data that I have, and from the information that I get from people, those numbers are kind of flip-flop when you're dealing with non-performing first. 75% of your exits are going to be through the property, and the remaining are going to be through the homeowner or the borrower if they're in the property. So what does that mean? That means with non-performing second mortgage notes, it's the borrower that's paying us a lot of the times, and it's not the equity in the property, which leads me to my second point, which is emotional equity. So we don't talk a lot about emotional equity anymore because it's a big equity market. But when I started this business and when I learned it, I got a lot of my experience and training on no equity deals. So what is emotional equity? Emotional equity is the emotional ties that the borrower has to the property, meaning how long has the homeowner been in the property? If they've been in the property 5 years, 10 years, the more somebody's in a property, even if there's no equity, they have a lot of ties, right? They got neighbors that they're friends with. Their kids go to schools. They're in the community. Emotional equity is a very powerful thing. Start understanding what I mean by emotional equity. A lot of homeowners, even if they owe 200 grand on a $200,000 house and they've been there 15 years, they really don't want to move and cut ties. realize, even though as investors we see no equity, they've been paying on this thing for 10 to 15 years. They put a lot of money into it, even though it doesn't appear to be equity. So just some things to think about. So as we move forward, remember these 2 points, right? Majority of the exits are through the borrower, not the equity in the property. And emotional equity is more important and powerful than the property's equity. Of course, we want equity in the property. The more we pay, the more equity we want. If things go south and we need to foreclose and liquidate the property, equity will pay us. So don't mistake for what I'm saying. I understand equity is very important. When it comes to the loan's borrower and the loan's collateral, the actual property, we're going to need to do due diligence on the following. So I broke it down into 9 points, but I broke it down as number 1, note seller's info, reputation and track record, the collateral lien's vesting position and the information, the collateral property's value and your loan's equity position. Number 4, the collateral property's tax status and the homeowner's insurance information or status. Number 5, the collateral property's condition and occupancy status. Number 6, the collateral property's borrower's credit report status, which, I definitely know with the credit report, it's more when we're dealing with the non-performing seconds. But if you're buying non-performing first and a homeowner's in a property, it's worth looking at. But I know a lot of people that invest with non-performing first aren't really too worried about the credit report. Number 7, the collateral property's borrower's bankruptcy status. And that goes for first and seconds. Number 8, the collateral documents and the loan's accounting information. And number 9, the actual loan's real cost. Are you going to hire an asset manager? You're going to have attorney legal cost. You're going to have loan servicing cost. We'll go over all that. So 9 points. Number 1, note seller's information, reputation, and track record. When you're doing business, if you can form these relationships, and a credible and a reputable note seller is going to be different to everybody. Everybody's going to build their relationships. They're going to find note sellers and they're going to do their own due diligence and form those relationships. But, I always say I'll overpay for stuff as long as I'm doing business with a legitimate person and I know I'm getting good deals. Rob's FIXnotes professional membership. You're getting access to a trade desk. You're getting access to a fund that sells a lot of notes. That's a credible and reputable note seller. We've all done business with them. If things go wrong, they fix it. They're very professional. So you would definitely want to know who you're doing business with. Definitely know what you're purchasing and how much you're paying for what you're buying. And always remember to execute and fund a transaction on time. You can always back out of your due diligence. Just supply the information to the note seller. Maybe you can renegotiate the price. But if the information that you find just totally turns you off, just share it with the note seller. Most people are okay with that. And most note sellers will give you a due diligence period from the time that they accept your bid until you actually sign the contract. So everybody's different with that window, but it's during that time where you can really do your due diligence and figure out if you're going to move forward with that. Obviously, you did your due diligence before you put the bid in, but it's crunch time when you're in this window before you actually sign a contract and fund. You want to start understanding note sellers' data spreadsheets. You want to know what you're bidding on. You want to understand the data that's on the spreadsheets. You want to understand what everything means, what the numbers are. I know Rob talks about this a lot. He lets people put in practice bids on stuff. He allows them to review spreadsheets. So you can really start understanding the data and the numbers. Somebody like me, like if I get a spreadsheet from a note seller and it's not like how I want it, I'll start cutting and pasting and moving stuff, freezing panes. So it flows real good for me. I want the information. I'm in a very specific order and I like my spreadsheets clean and efficient. And a lot of times note sellers will supply spreadsheets with a lot of information. And sometimes the information is good to have, but it just doesn't do anything for me. So I'll get rid of it. If you do not work with Excel at all, start learning Excel. I've learned it basically in this business. Start learning, understanding Excel, and getting used to spreadsheets. So depending on your exit strategy when doing due diligence, always be aware of the property's condition. So when I'm investing in non-performing seconds and a first is performing and I'm buying that delinquent second and they're paying on that first, I can get a BPO or I can Google it and see what the property looks like. I actually can't go in it, but if I know a homeowner is paying $1,500 a month on a first mortgage, taxes and insurance are current, they're probably keeping the property up to par, probably somewhat clean. And that's where that emotional equity comes in great. Somebody's been in a property for 15 years. That's their house, man. They love that property. You always want to be aware of the property's condition. Obviously, it's a different avenue when you're dealing with non-performing first. You want to be aware of the homeowner's insurance situation and the status of the property taxes. There's multiple reports that can be very helpful to us when we're doing our due diligence. Majority of these reports, we talk about them all the time. They cost money. Some of the reports we discuss, you will need to be a member to access the company's product and access the reports. Some of the reports you can just order without being a member. The majority of the companies do have an application process that you need to go through to access these reports. A good note seller will supply credit reports, title reports, and some information for you. Not all of them, but good note sellers will supply that because they want to sell the product. One of the main reports that we do order when it comes to due diligence are what called title reports. A title report's an important document that provides a detailed overview of a property's legal status. When someone wants to buy a piece of property or a mortgage loan, they usually request a title report to understand who owns it and if there are any issues that could affect the purchase. This report is created after a title search, which is a thorough investigation into the property's history and legal standing. Think of it as like a background check on a person or a house or a piece of land. So you're basically doing your research and you're pulling out all the information that's against that property, piece of land, person, whatever you want to say. It's ensuring that everything's in order before the buyer makes a commitment. The title report contains several key pieces of information. First, it determines the current owner of the property, right? The vesting, who's on the deed, which is essential for confirming that the seller also has the right to sell that loan. Additionally, the title report will highlight any liens or encumbrances against the property. A lien is a legal claim against the property, often due to unpaid debts, which could complicate the sale, right? Or at least when you know what other liens are on the property, if it doesn't complicate it, you can at least negotiate and not get burnt and understand what you're buying. This really helps buyers avoid any type of surprises. Even though everything does happen in this business, as we go through these slides, start thinking about what products you're going to be using, what companies you want to reach out to, form those relationships. So property tax info. If there's unpaid taxes, a lot of the times that will show up on the title report. Tax liens will show up on the title report. But if you want current tax information, you can always call the county tax assessment office in that specific county and get that information. One thing that the county tax assessment offices across the country did, they created an online resource, Netro Online, which is a public records resource. So check that out. There's a lot of good information on there. O&E reports. So I mentioned this. They're known as ownership and encumbrance reports, also through ProTitle. It's basically a smaller version of a title report. Some title searches and title reports could cost a few $100, especially if you're getting them done through attorneys. But these O&E reports, they're pretty good. I just actually ordered one on my primary residence a couple months ago. Just was curious to see if there was anything crazy going on. And I think it cost me like $75. Well worth it. It's more about, it's going to tell you the vesting of the property, who owns it, who's on the deed, what mortgages are recorded and recorded in what order, and the ownership, the assignment documents, what's on record and what's recorded. TLO reports. So the company is TransUnion TLO. This is a company that you do need to fill out an application process and be a member of, and they will actually send people to your property or your office. They got a lot of requirements, like you got to have a locked file cabinet, you got to have a locked door, a lot of different things so you can get access. You're accessing a lot of private data, a lot of personal data. So, it doesn't surprise me that these companies do that type of stuff. They have like asset address reports. You can order bar reports, credit reports, foreclosure reports, property reports, criminal record reports. They got a lot of different stuff. I know they charge like a minimum monthly fee for a certain amount, and then when you go over that amount, they'll charge you additionally. I always talk about building these relationships. A lot of times, if I don't have access to something, I can reach out to somebody in my network and they can help me out. Data tree reports. I have a client that does this, very similar, I believe, to like a TLO. It's First American Data and Analytics. It's a lot of property data reports, kind of like the ownership and encumbrance reports, who's on title, who owns the property, who's on the deed. So like I said, there's plenty of investigation software and batch skip tracing services out there, but these are a lot of the main reports that we look at, and I really didn't go into like crazy detail and actually bring up an example because there's a lot that I want to get through. But a title report, like I said, it's just going to basically show you who owns the property, what mortgages are on the property, what assignments have been recorded on top of the mortgages, and if there's owed taxes and other liens that are on the property that are cloud title. Property's market value and the broker's price opinion, right? So a lot of the times when I'm doing my note due diligence for a non-performing second mortgage, I'm just getting information off of free market value property sites. Now, obviously, when we're dealing with non-performing first mortgages and you're buying big equity deals, you're going to probably want to dial in a little more and be more specific on that. And not only do they give you the value of the property, they actually also get some different information on it. Maybe some foreclosure status, last time the property's been sold. Some good information if you just Google the property address. As much as I'm getting the value, I'm also looking for information or just any red flags, anything that will come up that's going to prevent me from moving forward on buying this asset. Broker's price opinion. So most people probably cost around $100, maybe $125, but a broker's price opinion is actually getting a real estate broker or like a realtor to actually go out to a property and do a report for you. They're not going to be able to get into the property, but they'll go around the property. They're going to look at all the properties around it that have sold. They're going to come up with a better value than the free sites do. Another thing that we always forget to do is put the borrower's name in Google, the property address. As much as we're looking for the value, just see if anything comes up that will draw a red flag that would prevent you from actually buying the deal. Credit report and borrower's bankruptcy status. This is a lot that we're looking at when we're doing due diligence with non-performing seconds. The information could definitely help you out with non-performing first, but in my opinion, when you're doing your due diligence for non-performing seconds, it's all about the credit report and the borrower's bankruptcy status. When I buy notes, I believe a credit report should be supplied by the note seller, right? They own the note. They are allowed to actually order a credit report. And in order to sell it, you want to be able to get an updated credit report so the buyer can actually do some solid due diligence. Of all the reports, the credit reports are harder to get than most reports. A lot of times you need to be a legitimate business, legitimate office set up somewhere in a commercial piece. A lot of us use CoreLogic, which is Credco, and then TransUnion TLO also has credit reports. Really do need to understand credit reports and like what the information means. There's a lot of stuff on there, and it's kind of what I was telling you about Excel. You got to kind of sort through all the stuff and find the information that's really meaningful that will help you come up with the information to buy the loan. You're going to need to separate the good and the bad information, right? All these homeowners have been through something crazy over the last 10 years. So the information that you see, it's not going to look perfect, but it's about you sorting through the information and making decisions based off that info. Credit report items, you're going to have borrower information, their social security number, their birth date. You're going to see if they have any nicknames. You might be able to find some job information on the credit report. But the biggest thing with the credit report as a seconds investor is this is going to allow us to get the first mortgage information. On credit reports, you're going to be able to get that information on the first mortgage, the status of it. There's some good information on there. You'll be able to get the account number. Not all the time the account number. You'll be able to get when the last payment was, what the loan balance is, what the monthly payment was the loan modified? And if it's with a loan servicer, you're going to be able to get the loan servicer's name off the credit report who's actually servicing that loan. If the first mortgage information is not on the credit report, it doesn't mean that the loan's paid off. If you're buying a second and you order a title report and the title report's telling you you're in first position, the first mortgage was paid off at some time, that's a bonus. But with the credit report, if it's not on the credit report, a lot of times it just means that the borrower was discharged from Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And what that means, and we'll talk about it, is homeowners go through bankruptcy, they get discharged, and they now personally don't owe the money. The property owes the money still. So when that happens, a lot of times the lenders will stop reporting to the credit report. So you may look at a credit report and see that the first mortgage wasn't reported on for the last 5 years. It doesn't mean it's delinquent. They could have been discharged from bankruptcy. So another thing to think about when you're doing due diligence with the first mortgage status, when you buy a non-performing second, there's 3 categories for the first mortgage. The first is current, meaning they're paying on time. Number 2, it's unknown, which means we don't have the information. And number 3, it's delinquent. And delinquent could be 90 days, 150 days, 2 years, 5 years. But that unknown is a gold mine in this business. If you can get comfortable with due diligence and buying delinquent seconds with an unknown first mortgage status, you're going to get a better deal on that, okay? If you look at a credit report and the first mortgage isn't reporting anymore and you notice that the borrower went through a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and you believe they're still in the property, and you look at a title report, you look at a foreclosure report, and you don't see any indication that the first mortgage is foreclosing, and the number that maybe you're seeing on the loan balance is lower than what the original mortgage was, and you don't see any indication that the first mortgage is delinquent or foreclosing, a lot of times I'm comfortable taking that chance. Now, not everybody's comfortable with that, but you get some really good deals with the unknown. Some other stuff about the credit report, the length of the credit report. I know investors that will buy delinquent seconds and they don't care how long the credit report is. Some investors get turned off because the reality is the longer your credit report, the more credit history that you have, and usually the more turmoil that you have, the longer it goes. So, maybe you don't buy anything that's longer than 8 pages. It's something that you'll have to figure out and get comfortable with. But think about that as you're looking at credit reports. The longer they are, most likely the more issues that they're dealing with. Property information. Some of the credit reports will give you an idea of the length of the time that the person's been in the property. And maybe you'll see a couple different properties. Maybe you'll see the address that you're looking at says they were in the property from 2005 until now. You're good. If it says 2005 to 2015, and then there's another property that they're living in, something went on. They're either in a new property and renting this one out. Maybe there's a divorce or a separation and they now have 2 properties. But just something to think about, right? Because a lot of us like to buy these seconds when we know that it's owner occupied rather than tenant occupied. So the credit score on the credit report. These borrowers have been through a lot of stuff. The credit score is not going to be fantastic. The majority that I see are probably in the 5s and the 6s. Anything above 6, you're golden. If it's below 500, it may turn me off a little bit. But just remember, these people have been through a lot of stuff. So the credit score, it's important, but it's more about the information on the credit report. Borrower's bankruptcy status. So there's an online bankruptcy site called Pacer. It's public access to court electronic records. It's open for everybody. It's a service provided by the National Bankruptcy Courts. It's a database. It has every bankruptcy case ever filed. They charge you money if you access a certain amount. They do give you some free access, and then when you go over your limit, they do charge you. The best way to access a borrower's Pacer information is with the Social Security number. If you don't have that, you can definitely try to put in all their information, but majority of the time, the Social Security number will get you exactly what you want. I always need to go into Pacer, and I am in Pacer a lot. So let's do a quick review of bankruptcy. The main bankruptcies that we deal with are Chapter 7 bankruptcy and Chapter 13 bankruptcy. So think about right now, we're talking about due diligence, and we're trying to get information before we buy something. So Chapter 7 bankruptcy just means that the homeowner filed bankruptcy and they are personally not liable for the debt anymore. They've been discharged from Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They may be in the property still, maybe they're not, but that mortgage lien still exists on the property and needs to be addressed, and anybody that's in that property needs to address the loan. You have a right to foreclose and exercise your rights as a lender to get a homeowner to pay on that debt or anybody that's in that debt, but they're personally not liable for it anymore. I love Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It just means the homeowner got rid of their stuff, and if they think that loan is gone, they probably have something else coming to them at one time. Not all attorneys are real clear with these borrowers about this stuff, but that's what Chapter 7 is. Chapter 13 is reorganization of the debt. The borrowers get put into a payment plan and they have to pay it back what they owe over a period of time. And when they get discharged from the Chapter 13 bankruptcy, sometimes they still owe on the actual loan. The majority of the time in the bankruptcy, they're just cleaning up back payments and getting current. So I want you to think about these 2 things when you're doing due diligence for non-performing seconds and you see Chapter 13 bankruptcy is active. If a homeowner is not paying on that loan and it's active, it means 2 things. Whoever owned that second mortgage never filed their proof of claim, or the homeowner actually never addressed it. People buy loans in bulk, stuff gets lost in the mix. So sometimes homeowners file bankruptcy and lenders just aren't aware of it and don't file the proper paperwork, okay? But it just means that it wasn't addressed. Or a worst case scenario is we don't like to get stripped in Chapter 13 bankruptcy. So the second mortgage was not included in the bankruptcy plan because the borrower filed a motion to strip the second mortgage and the courts granted it, even though they still got to complete the plan for that strip to actually happen. I stay away from that stuff. I'm not going to take a gamble that I'm not going to buy a loan. I'll take the gamble if I owned a loan and I forced the homeowner into bankruptcy, but I'm not going to take a gamble on something unless I can get it real cheap. So think about that. If you're looking at a spreadsheet and Chapter 13 bankruptcy is active, but the person's not getting paid on it because they're selling it as a non-performer. Two things, right? They didn't address it, which is fine. They're going to have to address it at some time, but it's that bottom one about the strip that I really want you to be aware of. Collateral documents and loans accounting info. As we're doing due diligence and we get better at due diligence, we're going to be able to spot things. So it's really important that I talked about with the credible and reputable note sellers. That's how I got really good and comfortable in this business, relying on people that I trust. So I kind of wrote down a little bit, but items that, I'm going to do my due diligence on are the collateral documents, the recorded mortgage. Is the mortgage actually recorded? Is it actually the borrowers and the property address that I'm buying, the same one on the document? Same thing with the note. Does the allowance chain match up? Are the assignments recorded? Are they recorded in order? Are all the assignments matching the actual original mortgage? These aren't always included, but they're nice to have. And that is one of the nice things about doing business with Rob's Trade Desk, and especially USMR. When you're buying from USMR, you're getting all this information. The original title insurance policy, the original loan documents, the actual original loan transaction information, loan payment history. Because when we buy these loans, we're getting accounting on a spreadsheet. But is there real payment history backing up the loan from when they were paying all the way through when they went delinquent up to now? Not every note seller can supply that. Payment history has gotten a little more aggressive with the courts and the attorneys, meaning that they want solid payment history over the last 5 years. But just some stuff to think about. You want to become a master of due diligence. Real cost, okay? Obviously, you have your purchase price. You got some costs with due diligence, but I want you to start thinking about real big costs when you buy delinquent loans. And the number one cost is legal costs, foreclosure costs. Not every homeowner is going to come out early on. Not every homeowner is going to come out after a demand letter, especially with non-performing first. You may have to foreclose and liquidate that property. So just start thinking about and doing your own homework. And that's another power of Rob's community, is he has a lot of this information already put together and available for members. Every state in this country is different. It could be a non-judicial or it could be a judicial foreclosure state. Non-judicial are quicker and faster and cheaper, and they are usually held by a trustee on the court steps, whereas a judicial foreclosure are longer, more expensive, and they go through the courts. You want to be aware of the cost and the length. Always think worst case scenario, and whatever falls short of that is good for you. Think about the difference between an uncontested and a contested foreclosure. If a foreclosure goes real smooth, they're the cost that you're going to see out there that everybody's telling you, Fannie Mae guidelines, all the charts are uncontested foreclosures. A contested foreclosure is when an opposing attorney or a homeowner is pushing back against you. They don't believe you either own the loan or they don't believe you have the right to foreclose. Whatever that scenario, it's called a contested foreclosure, and it will be more expensive. If you buy a loan and a homeowner files bankruptcy, there's going to be some costs with that. You're going to have to file a proof of claim. You may have to hire an attorney. It will take you longer to get paid. There's costs with bankruptcy. I just threw this in here. It's not to scare anybody, but it's just the reality of compliance and regulations in today's marketplace. Some states require third-party debt collection licenses and bonds. So do your homework on that. Statute of limitations. And the reason I mention that is when you're doing your due diligence, maybe a loan hasn't been paid on in 10 years. You need to realize if there's statute of limitations in that specific state, maybe you're not going to be able to collect 10 years of arrears. You might only be able to collect the last 5 years. So the payoff number is different, but they're real costs that you need to start thinking about when you buy stuff. And then the final one is self-directed IRA custodians and loan servicers. If you're buying these loans in IRAs or health savings accounts, there's costs with that. Loan servicers have setup fees. They charge a monthly fee. So all real costs that you want to be aware of. And the cost to record documents, similar to due diligence, you're going to have some due diligence and document recording costs. Now, there's states where it costs $20 to record an assignment, and then there's states where it's $200 to record an assignment. So just all things to think about. So the deal with title reports, I got very comfortable in this business buying loans from legitimate sellers, people that I trust, people that I know, and it allowed me to get very comfortable with it. A lot of the good note sellers will also supply me a title report. How can you quickly find out whether a house is intact or not? Do you use boots on the ground services? After what period of time does information about a house burning down get into the public database? Is it possible to find out about this quickly? No, absolutely, right? You can obviously do all your Google searches, but a lot of us will order a BPO before we buy them. Some of us don't. Like the door knock service, you don't want to send anyone to the property like to actually bang on the door. I mean, there's got to be services out there that will go drive by a property, you know, even if you reached out to a particular area and found a realtor or service like that. There's private investigators out there that will probably do it. Just some ideas for you. Or what states do you like to purchase in? Most of us like non-judicial states just because they're cheaper and faster, but the reality with non-performing seconds is a lot of them are in judicial states. A lot of these second mortgages and lines of credit were given out in specific areas and states that were stable, solid communities that were growing good, right? Not these marketplaces where the equity shoots up like California and Florida, and then the equity crashes. A lot of these second mortgage and lenders don't want to lend money and put themselves in a bad position with regulations and compliance coming in at some states that you used to like maybe like an Oregon or a state of Washington. They started getting a little crazier with compliance and regulations. So the reason I fell in love with the non-performing second business is it was a cookie cutter business and it didn't matter what state I was in. I can manage it all from the state that I was in and just deal with stuff as it arises. But a lot of the product, like I said, it's more dictated based off of what the bank lent out on and what the bank is selling. Is it preferable to buy a non-performing second given that the first loan has already been in foreclosure court and they're waiting a period for the auction date to be set? Equity in the house is not enough to pay to both loans. So if I own a non-performing second and the first mortgage is foreclosing and that first mortgage is in front of me, sometimes I might not foreclose from my position, or maybe I was foreclosing. All of a sudden I found out that the first was foreclosing. So you always got to make business decisions when you actually own the loan. When you're doing your due diligence, stuff to think about. If a first gets to the foreclosure sale and is not addressed, two things can happen at that foreclosure sale. It reverts back to the lender for the amount that they took it to sale for. And if that happens, that second mortgage loan is wiped. It becomes an unsecured loan. You can't collect it on it anymore as a secured loan. Second thing that could happen is third-party investors bid that up at sale and somebody buys it above and beyond. And that is happening more in this market than in a no equity market or a no equity deal. If a first takes it to sale and they're owed $300 and the third party buys it for $350, that means the first is getting $300 and there's an overage after court costs and different fees. There should be money in there for the second. Other things that could happen. The homeowners file bankruptcy. It puts a stop on the first mortgage lender from foreclosing, slows everything down, and maybe they address the first in the bankruptcy plan, and maybe they're going to now address your second. Maybe they do a loan modification with the first mortgage lender in the foreclosure period. That happens a lot in portfolios that I manage. We backed off on our second. First is in foreclosure. They do a loan mod with the first. We see that they're making payments. Now our second's back in business. We can start foreclosure. We can reach out to them. But obviously with the seconds, the first is a big deal of what's going on with it. If you're owed $100,000 on your second and it goes to sale based off the example I gave, maybe you get 30 or 40 grand of overage. Doesn't always happen, but it definitely happens.